Failure is painful. Delay is painful. But sometimes the most painful thing is when God is still silent through it all. That was my experience during my PhD years in the US. What started out as a promising academic path slowly became a 10.5-year struggle. At the very beginning, I failed the preliminary math exam. Then I failed the PhD qualifying exam twice. And I was left with two choices: quit or transfer to another school. I chose to transfer, but the price was starting over, retaking core courses and taking the qualifying exam again. Research was already a nightmare for me. Then in my 5th year, I had to change my dissertation advisor under unavoidable circumstances. My new advisor did not seem very willing to guide me, and that made my research even harder. Writing in English was yet another torture for me. In fact, it almost became the last straw. At that time, I had a nickname in graduate school: the PhD student with awful luck. At that point, I was no longer just struggling with my studies. I was wrestling with God. I questioned Him and I challenged Him. Sometimes I felt resentment toward Him. I even seriously thought about quitting both my PhD and my faith. But at the same time, I was in awe of Him. The more I prayed, the less progress I seemed to make. And that left me confused. Sometimes I even stopped praying for my research, half of afraid that the more I prayed, the worse it would get. And also half of hoping that if I left my research alone, God might somehow have mercy on it. And yet, God still seemed silent. So I asked myself, which choice would cost me more? Quitting or continuing? If I gave up my PhD, all those years of effort would be wasted, and I would lose the little confidence I had left. If I gave up my faith, I would be walking away from the principles and the values that had shaped my life. Somehow, giving up felt more costly than holding on. So I made up my mind. I would keep going with my PhD and my faith. As I neared the end of my PhD journey, God used two things to show me that He knew what I had been through, and He was pleased that I had held on. The first was my final defense. A final defense is the last major hurdle before the PhD is granted. The moment when your committee challenges your dissertation and you are expected to defend it. So I thought I was walking into a battle. Instead, my final defense felt more like a roundtable conversation. One professor would raise the question, and another professor would answer it. I hardly needed to defend myself. Most of the time, I was simply walking the committee through my research and making sure everyone was on the same page. The whole process was so unexpectedly peaceful that I knew it was finished. The second was an email from one of my committee members, a British professor. After my defense, he wrote to tell me that my writing was articulate. He asked who had proofread my dissertation because he wanted to recommend that person to his students. When I read that email, I cried. I had no proofreader. I wrote the entire dissertation on my own. I used to carry 4 dictionaries in one laptop with me every day, walking from place to place to just get my writing done. Whenever anxiety hit, I had to move again. Only God knew how painful that writing process had been for me. And coming from a British professor, that compliment meant even more to me. Through that email, I felt God saying, I have been with you all along. Looking back, I was grateful that I neither gave up on myself nor walked away from my faith. I learned that God may not respond to you right away, but He will answer in His time and in His way. I also learned that God cared more about my relationship with Him, more than about my performance or the final outcome. So, still I will believe. Still I will hold on. Still I will give thanks.